We are down to the wire. There's just one preseason game left for Jets roster hopefuls to state their case. Chris Streveler or Mike White at quarterback? What about Denzel Mims? What about Chuma Edoga? We're talking Jets offensive roster bubble players today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, August 25th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or your first watch every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Big shout out to subscribers to this podcast, and to join that group, just hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening. You'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. If you enjoy it, it helps other Jets fans find the channel. Today, our episode is brought to you by BriteCo Jewelry and Watch Insurance. BriteCo brings you comprehensive, fast, and affordable jewelry insurance for as low as $5 per month. Check out your special offer for Locked On listeners and get covered in under 2 minutes at brite.co/locked on. That's brite.co/locked on. Well, we are near the end of the preseason. The final game, the Jets and the Giants will play on Sunday at MetLife Stadium. And that means it's the last chance for players at the bottom of the roster, players who are kind of on the bubble, to make the team, to show coaches in the front office what they can do. And today we're going to talk about players on the offensive side of the ball who are on the bubble. We're going to go position by position. And I think that we probably spend too much time talking about the quarterback position as far as the roster battle goes, because we know Zach Wilson's going to be the number one quarterback whenever he returns from his knee injury. We know Joe Flacco is going to begin the year as the number two. I guess he's going to begin the year as the number one quarterback because Wilson's out. But he'll technically be the number two quarterback on the depth chart because, of course, you'll include Wilson. The question is who's going to be the number three quarterback. And a battle has really begun to heat up between Mike White, the incumbent, and Chris Streveler, the preseason star for the Jets, the guy who's led the Jets to 2 comeback victories, 2 fourth-quarter game-winning drives for Chris Streveler, the former CFLer. Now, I actually think that in a normal scenario, if everybody was healthy for the Jets, they might only keep 2 quarterbacks. In the days where you need to keep a third quarterback on your active roster are kind of gone, in part because about 10, 11 years ago, the NFL changed its rules. The NFL used to allow you to have one player who did not count against your active game day roster as a quarterback. They used to allow you to essentially activate one specific player, but that specific player had to be a third quarterback. So there was a benefit to having a third quarterback on your roster. And the other aspect is that now with the expanded practice squads, I think it's 16 players on your practice squad, you usually can have a third quarterback if you need one on your practice squad. And for the most part, on game days, you're only going to have 2 quarterbacks active. So I think in a normal scenario, the Jets may keep neither of White nor Streveler. The thing is, because Wilson may not be ready for week 1, they're probably going to have to keep a third quarterback. And the thing is, even if Zach Wilson's ready to go week 1, because he's coming back from injury, you may just want a little bit of insurance. You may want to just have that third quarterback available. It may be the rare situation where you do activate 3 quarterbacks, and that is if we don't know what Zach Wilson's status for week 1 is. We know he's going to be back early in the season, but we don't know specifically whether he's going to be back for the Ravens game. So this opens up an interesting battle. And I don't want to talk too much about the number 3 quarterback because, in all honesty, if either Mike White or Chris Streveler have to play games for the Jets this year, they're probably going to have a tough time winning. And I know people are going to yell at me because I said this last year. This is exactly what I said last year. And Mike White played a brilliant game against the Cincinnati Bengals and cannot take anything away from Mike White from that performance. But I think we're seeing more and more, especially as we've gone through the preseason, that was just kind of a career game for Mike White. That it was not really representative of what he brings to the table. Very limited arm strength, very limited ability to challenge the entire field as a quarterback. And in that game, the Bengals really never made him throw over the top. They essentially gave him checkdowns all game, wide open for nice gains. It was a really bad performance by Cincinnati. And again, I don't want to take anything away from him, but it was part Mike White taking what was there and part the Bengals giving him what he could do. And, if Mike White was forced to throw over the top in that game, if the Bengals adjusted, they may have gone a little bit differently. At least that's the feeling I'm beginning to get based on, what White did subsequently against the Buffalo Bills, what he did last year in the preseason, and what he's done this year. He's had a tough time throwing the ball past 5 yards. It's not great. So, yes, I understand I said this last year and Mike White threw for 405 yards, but you can always run into a career game. Are you going to get a career game a second time? And then Streveler, I know people are going to be yelling at me about Streveler too because he's leading all these comebacks. Well, he doesn't look like he's that refined as a passer. He could bring some things to the table as a runner, but when you're on your third quarterback, your chances of winning games are not very good in this league. So we're spending a lot of time talking about it, and part of it's because this is what the preseason is now. I think there's a stronger and stronger case each year that maybe we don't need the preseason, or maybe we don't even need 3 games. We've gone from 4 games now down to 3. Maybe we don't even need 3 preseason games because the Jets played none of their starters against Atlanta. So, what else is there to talk about other than the third quarterback? It becomes relevant. I think pending the results of the last game, and listen, I could change my mind very easily in the last game. If Mike White shows he can occasionally put the ball down the field and Streveler really struggles, maybe we're having a different discussion. I don't think that the case is closed yet. I don't think that the third quarterback competition has been decided. But I think if we're going based on performance so far, it's got to be Streveler. And I'm thinking this through, and I'm thinking, all right, let's go to a situation where somehow the Jets don't have Zach Wilson and they don't have Joe Flacco. Who's more likely to win you a game? Now, you could say Mike White because Mike White's won a game. But I'm not sure that's the case if you're thinking about specific skill sets here. Because Streveler does have running ability. And he's not just, he's a guy who I think can run with some degree of power. I don't know if he's a big-time power back, but I think he's a guy who's not necessarily just a finesse runner. I think he can lower the shoulder occasionally. So as I'm thinking this through, Mike White, we saw the game plan that will work for him last year against Cincinnati. Now that the book's out on Mike White, is that game plan going to work again? I don't know, and I'm increasingly becoming doubtful of that. Streveler, you bring a different skill set to the table. Now, if you had to win 5 games with Streveler, could you do it? It would be a very tall order. But in like a one-game situation, which really, if we're being realistic about a third-string quarterback, you're not going to find anybody who's going to be able to win you more than one game. But you can manufacture plays, you can put in packaged plays, you can build in designed runs for Streveler. If you get a good defensive performance, and if the receivers show up, and if your offensive line shows up, could you stay competitive in maybe like one game? Now, after one game, everybody's going to catch up to you. You're going to be, you're not going to have any success. But in a one-game situation, could it work with Streveler? Probably not, but I feel like you might have a better shot with the skill set Streveler brings to the table than the skill set Mike White brings to the table. I don't know where the Jets are right now. I don't think that they love Mike White. And I go back to what they did last year. As soon as Zach Wilson got hurt, they immediately traded for Flacco. And they could say all they want that, we wanted to have a veteran backup. They had Josh Johnson. And I don't care what you say. I understand the idea of depth at quarterback. Listen, I am the king of saying teams don't invest enough at the backup quarterback position. I understand it, but I don't think they traded for Flacco just to be a short-term backup for Mike White and then like a third guy when Zach Wilson returned to the lineup. I think them trading for Flacco immediately showed that they did not have confidence in Mike White, and then Mike White went out and surprised them, essentially kept Flacco on the bench, and then the second Mike White struggled, Zach Wilson still wasn't ready to return, and they put Flacco in for a game against Miami. And all this stuff is not stuff you do if you're confident in Mike White. So, I think that it feels like maybe the Jets just brought Mike White back as potential trade bait. Maybe they were hoping some team would need a quarterback. I think maybe there was some thought that, if Zach Wilson gets hurt, maybe we'll have some insurance, or Joe Flacco gets hurt, maybe we'll have some insurance. Well, it hasn't looked like he's great insurance, and now Streveler's come out of nowhere and played well, albeit against third and fourth teamers, albeit in the fourth quarter of preseason games. And I think in this game, it sounds like the starters are going to play. Robert Saleh indicated that the starters are going to play between 1 and 2 quarters after they sat out in the game against Atlanta. So I guess if there's a quote-unquote dress rehearsal, this will be it for the Jets in the preseason. But I think Streveler should get into the game before White, because I'd like to see Streveler against higher-level competition. He's probably not going to play against the Giants starters, nor should he. He shouldn't play. I mean, look, he shouldn't play with the Jets starters. Again, we're talking the third quarterback here. In an ideal world, Zach Wilson's back week 1, and whoever between Streveler or Mike White gets the nod as the number 3 quarterback really is not going to be a relevant player. But I think Streveler, after his success against third and fourth teamers, let's see what he can do. If he looks better than Mike White against backups, then I feel like that's kind of your answer. I feel like that's probably the direction you end up going in. So I think right now Streveler's got the lead. I think a strong performance by Mike White could change it, though. I think as the incumbent, as the guy who does have that win on his resume, I think if it's close, Mike White probably gets the nod. But at this point, it doesn't seem close. It seems like Streveler is winning the battle. So if it's based on merit, maybe Streveler's the guy. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to move our attention to the skill positions. We're going to talk wide receiver. We're going to talk running back. There's a prominent player from a Jets draft class 2 years ago, Denzel Mims, who's on the roster bubble. How worried should he be? We'll discuss ahead here on this Thursday episode. You don't want to be that guy, and you do not want it splattered all over the internet. The guys at BriteCo Jewelry Insurance will make sure that you get a replacement for the full value of that ring. No matter whether it's lost, stolen, or you just can't figure out what happened to it, go to brite.co/lockedon. It's the fastest and easiest and cheapest way to cover yourself with the best jewelry insurance in the business. They're geniuses. They made buying insurance for your engagement ring, your watch, or whatever so easy that you can get covered in 2 minutes on your cell phone. You won't find a better deal on great coverage that's super affordable. brite.co//lockedon. They have some hilarious videos too. If you go to that site, you'll see the viral videos. A guy's falling out of his boat as he's proposing. This is what happens. You take yourself out of your comfort zone. You take yourself out of your area of expertise. You try this high-flying proposal on the water. Suddenly, you're in the water. The boat's tipped over, and you've lost the ring. That's where BriteCo comes in. You have to see the video. BriteCo has a bunch of these hilarious videos that you can see for yourself at brite.co/lockedon. brite.co/lockedon. These videos will make you laugh, I promise you, and they provide great insurance for your jewelry. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. The show's free and available on all platforms. Today we're talking Jets roster bubble players on the offensive side of the ball. Let's talk the wide receiver position, because this is a spot with a very prominent player who's clearly on the roster bubble, and that's Denzel Mims. Now, I think if you look at the receiver position, there are 4 players who are guaranteed roster spots. They are Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson, Braxton Berrios. Davis was a free agent signing, big free agent signing a year ago. Moore was a second-round pick a year ago. Wilson, a top 10 pick this year. Berrios just got a fairly lucrative contract for a guy who's really a depth receiver. So that leaves a couple spots behind them. And Denzel Mims is the most prominent player. And if you've been following the Jets for the last year plus, you know that the coaching staff does not love Denzel Mims. And even in these games, I mean, even with the Jets sitting most of their starters last game against Atlanta, Denzel Mims was not starting. The first preseason game, he was the 7th receiver in. And I have to say, I understand why they don't love Denzel Mims. In fact, I think there's a large portion of the fan base that's still clinging on to this idea Denzel Mims is going to be an impact receiver. Listen, I was the number 1 fan of this pick. I was the guy saying it was the greatest pick. Like, if you go back to the 2020 draft and listen to those podcasts, I said, I can't believe this guy fell. This was the guy who was the dream pick for me. I never thought he'd make it all the way to the Jets in the second round. Heading into day 2 of that draft, I spoke with my father, and he said, who do you want? I told him, well, Mims would be the great choice. He'll never fall to the Jets, though. So listen, I get it. I loved Denzel Mims, but he has not looked like a competent receiver in this league. Aside from maybe a few flashes in 2020 that were decent for a rookie, but by the time you're in year 2, they're not good enough, and he regressed in year 2. And he's made a few catches in preseason this year, but he hasn't really changed the narrative. He hasn't really shown he's that much better. So listen, people saying Denzel Mims still has this great potential to be an impact player. I don't know that that's true. But here's the thing. We're not talking about whether Denzel Mims is going to be a Pro Bowl receiver. He's probably not. We're not talking about whether he's going to be an 1,200-yard receiver. He's probably not. We're talking, is he one of the top 5, 6 receivers on this roster? I think he might be, and the coaching staff doesn't seem to feel that way. Coaching staff seems to really love Jeff Smith. I still can't figure out why. I don't know what Jeff Smith is bringing to the table, but they seem to really be big fans. There's another guy, Irv Charles, who apparently has had a pretty big camp. He has been playing well on special teams, so could he be in the mix? Possibly. There's also Tariq Black, number 3, the guy last year. If you watch the season finale against Buffalo, and you're a diehard fan, if you watch the season finale against Buffalo last year, because it was a really difficult game to watch. It was almost like one of those unwatchable preseason games. But there was this guy out there making plays, number 3, and I think everybody. I do a Jets daily podcast. I write on the Jets all the time on my website. I didn't know who this guy was. So this is the competition, and it's not so much is Denzel Mims going to be a star in this league. Is he better than these guys? And I think the answer is probably. Now, there's a little bit of another factor here, and that's, can Denzel Mims play special teams? Because your number 5 receiver is a guy who usually needs to play special teams, unless he's going to be that 1,100-yard receiver. And that's where Mims could lose out, because even if the other guys are a little bit better in the receiving game, you're also balancing the fact that you may not need these guys, and if one of these guys is maybe a little bit, maybe close to Mims as a receiver, but can really provide value on special teams, then you may go with that other guy, because you're talking about your total contribution, your total expected contribution to the team. And you have to factor in, yes, you want depth, but you may not need it. So you also have to think about areas where other guys may be able to contribute. I feel like I'm leaning towards keeping Mims, but I feel like the Mims debate is essentially between these two groups of people. These people who are still clinging to the hope Mims is going to be a great player, and then the people who've completely given up and just want him cut. And for me, I'm probably more on the side of I've given up hope on him, but the question isn't whether I've given up hope on him. The question is whether he's one of the top 5-6 receivers on the team. And I think there's a case he's number 5. And while I don't have great hopes for him being an impact player going forward, I think he conceivably could be a useful backup. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, so I might lean towards keeping Mims. I don't think the Jets are going there, though. I think Jeff Smith's getting a roster spot, and I think one of these other guys could end up making the team. Now let's talk about the running back position. I think at the running back position, there are 2 guys who are absolute locks, and those are the 2 recent draft picks, Breece Hall, Michael Carter. That's your 1-2 punch. I don't know whether Nick Bowden makes it. Nick Bowden's an interesting case because he's kind of a fullback, but in today's NFL, the fullback role is typically played by a tight end, and I see the Jets keeping 4 tight ends. So Nick Bowden's kind of a roster bubble guy. Beyond that, Tevin Coleman, I think, makes the team. I feel like maybe it's like a 75% type deal where I think it's more likely that he makes the team than it is he gets cut. But I could see a scenario where maybe Tevin Coleman gets cut. You have to remember, 75-25. 25% is still pretty good odds. It's still pretty. It's not like it's 1%. You have something has a quarter of a chance of happening. There's a realistic possibility. It doesn't mean it's likely, but it means it's possible. I think Tevin Coleman makes the team. And after that, I don't know that you really need a 4th tailback. So you look at the other guys who could potentially be in the mix. You've got Zonovan Knight, the young player out of NC State who played well against the Eagles, kind of a power back who maybe has showed a little extra gear on a kickoff return. I did not think he was great against Atlanta, though. You have LaMichael Pearin, who was drafted for another coaching staff, and at the time the Jets drafted him, we're talking the 2020 draft, I was really excited about Mims. As excited as I was about Mims, I was equally as unexcited about Pearin because there was nothing that really jumped out about his game other than he had good hands in the receiving game. Not that he was like a great route runner. Not that he was explosive after the catch. Just he could adjust to a ball in the air that was misthrown and catch it, which is not really what you're looking for in an ideal world in the back, at least as the number 1 trait. Of course, you'd like that skill set. You don't want it to be the only thing that they do that really impresses you. And then our old friend Ty Johnson, who is another guy like Jeff Smith, who the coaching staff seems to really like. They used him in that receiving role so frequently last year, even though he could not catch. I hope Ty Johnson's gone. This might be one of those things. If I was Joe Douglas, I would probably cut Ty Johnson just to make sure the coaching staff didn't put him in games. I think Ty Johnson's actually not, he's an okay runner. I don't think he's an awful runner. He's not a good enough runner that I specifically set out to guarantee him a roster spot. But I think he's an okay runner, but he can't catch. And I hope that with Breece Hall and Michael Carter in the mix and Tevin Coleman, three backs who are going to be good in the receiving game to varying degrees, that there's no need for any further playing time for Ty Johnson, especially in the receiving game. But to be sure, I may just cut him just to take that option off the table because they used him as like their receiving back last year, And that made no sense. So, but I think it's very possible the Jets only keep 3 backs. Especially, in the 4th back could be Bowden, but you have tight ends who can fill that role, and lots of time, and most of the time, I think in today's NFL, unless you have a Juice Jack in San Francisco, you're going to use your tight end as kind of like a fullback role. The plays that call for a fullback, you can throw a tight end in there, and they'll be able to figure it out. So I think that it could be 3. There could be a 4th. Maybe Knight makes the team. I think Zonovan Knight's more of a practice squatter who gets called up if somebody gets injured. But that's who's in the mix at the running back position. Now, as we close out today's episode on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about players at the blocking positions. We'll talk offensive line, and we'll talk tight end. Who's going to be the 4th tight end? Is it going to be Lawrence Cager? I think so. I'll tell you why as we close out this Thursday episode of Locked On Jets. Of course, cutdown day is coming up. The Jets will cut down the last time. They'll go from 80 to 53 players, and then they will have their initial roster for week 1. A lot of players will be looking for new jobs. As you gear up for the fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. So you can find job seekers using LinkedIn Jobs. It's here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. You can create a job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. And I check every day to make sure that there's no listing for a new Locked On Jets host. Locked On, not replacing me yet. I'll keep checking every day, though, just to make sure. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. Here on this Thursday, we're talking bubble players for the Jets on their roster as they approach the final preseason game this weekend against the New York Giants. Let's talk tight ends. There are 3 tight ends who are guaranteed spots on this roster. They are Tyler Conklin, CJ Uzama, and Jeremy Ruckert. Do the Jets keep a 4th tight end? I think they do, from the standpoint that Mike LaFleur is going to use 2 tight ends a lot. I think the Jets are going to be one of those teams that 2 tight end package happens around 30% of the time. That's typically the high water mark in the league. Last year they kept 4 tight ends, and they had the 4 tight ends that they had last year. They had Tyler Kroft, Ryan Griffin, Dan Brown, and Trevon Wesco. So if you had those 4 and you kept 4, I feel like you're probably going to keep 4 this year. Now, one caveat, Dan Brown was a guy who played special teams a lot for the Jets, so maybe they kept him as a special teamer more than a tight end, but I feel like you keep 4 this year. And the 4th guy to me should be Lawrence Cager. He's shown ability. He's shown playmaking ability in preseason. He's looked better than the alternatives. I mean, the alternatives are Trevon Wesco and Kenny Yeboah. We've seen Wesco. If Wesco is not developed into a dominant blocker, and that was always the theory behind Wesco, was that he was going to develop into a dominant blocking tight end. It has not happened. If it hasn't happened by now, is it really going to happen? So that leaves the battle between Cager and Yeboah. And Yeboah is kind of the same profile as Cager. Undrafted free agent, recent signing, supposed to be a pretty athletic, dynamic receiving option at the tight end position. Well, which of these guys has looked more dynamic as a receiving option at the tight end position in preseason? It's Cager, and I think the same was true in training camp. I think the same was true through the offseason program. It's pretty clear that Cager is the best of the options for the 4th tight end spot. Could you put him on the practice squad? I mean, I imagine you could probably sneak him onto the practice squad, but I say that Cager should get the spot. Cager should get the nod. And that moves us to the offensive line. Now, on the offensive line, you've got Dwayne Brown, you've got Laken Tomlinson, Connor McGovern, Elijah Vera Tucker, George Fant. I think the 4th-round pick, Max Mitchell, is guaranteed. Nate Herbig, I think, is a likely guy to make the roster. Dan Feeney, backup center. So it depends on how many offensive linemen you want to keep. And this is the reason I'm not doing a 53-man roster projection, because I don't know what positions the Jets are really going to focus on. I do think tight end's going to get 4, but Are they going to keep an extra back? Or are they going to keep an extra offensive lineman? I mean, these are decisions that are difficult. It's difficult to compare offensive line to running backs if you're talking about the last roster spot. So I'm just going through seeing who's on the bubble. Because it's possible you could, in theory, keep 8 offensive linemen. If you have a tackle who can back up both tackle spots and a guard who can back up both guard spots and maybe kick inside the center, and a center prospect you trust, it's possible you could keep 8. But you could go to 9. You could even go to 10. I think clearly the ninth spot, if the Jets keep 9, would be a battle between Connor McGovern, who's been, I'm sorry, not Connor McGovern, Connor McDermott, who's been injured, and Chuma Edoga, the recent third-round pick. I don't really care, to be honest with you. I don't think either of those guys are going to be particularly helpful. I guess McDermott has a little bit more versatility because he has played guard, but he hasn't played guard effectively. So how much does versatility matter if you can't play a position? If you can play more positions ineffectively, does it really versatility? I don't know. I think if they keep 10, both McDermott and Edoga make the team. I don't have a great feeling about this. I don't really care if they keep Edoga over McDermott or McDermott over Edoga. In fact, I could justify keeping 8 and maybe just going with a couple of practice squad linemen who get called up if there's an injury. Because on game day, you may not activate more than 8. I think you could get away with it. And if you don't really have quality depth, are either of these guys, if you cut them and they go away, really better than somebody you could get off the practice squad? I'm not really sure. I might keep 8. I think they could keep 9. They could even keep 10 if they want. This is the area where I probably feel the least amount of passion. Anyway, that's all for our episode today. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. Once again, a big shout out to subscribers to this podcast. Thank you so much for supporting the show. If you enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and you'll join that group and you'll never miss an episode. You'll receive notifications as new episodes are posted. And if you do enjoy the show and you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. It helps us out. So does giving this episode a thumbs up on YouTube if you're watching. Have a great Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to close out the week.